UWI acknowledges the First Nation comprising the indigenous people who were displaced by the Columbus Project and general European colonization, and the hundreds of Africans who toiled for more than 100 years as enslaved people on the old Papine sugar estate. The UWI recognizes their labor and sacrifices in preserving this land that has enabled the establishment of a university that now provides opportunities for many of their descendants to receive an education that they themselves were denied. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I want to immediately introduce Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, who will bring us remarks this morning. Vice Chancellor Hilary Beckles was recently appointed Chancellor of the United Nations University. He's a distinguished historian, academic, and global thought leader. He's a distinguished university administrator, economic historian, and specialist in higher education and development thinking and practice. And of course, an internationally acclaimed historian. Renowned for his expertise in Caribbean history, slavery, reparations, and development, he has authored over 20 books and numerous scholarly articles. He has received numerous awards, including Honorary Doctor of Letters from Brock University, the University of Glasgow, University of Hull, and the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Ghana. He is chairman of the Caribbean Community Commission on Reparation and Social Justice. Sir Hilary is also founder and director of the CLR James Center for Cricket Research at Cave Hill campus and former member of the West Indies Cricket Board. Sir Hilary was also an editor of the UNESCO General History of Africa series. Sir Hilary's visionary leadership has elevated UWI to global prominence while advancing regional and international development through education and advocacy. Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor, over to you.
Thank you so very much, colleague Sonia. It is for me a tremendous honor and a joy, in fact, to be a part of this launch of the Reparatory Justice clusters, and to say that this is all very timely and very, very significant indeed. It's a great moment, this conjuncture, which has taken place in respect of universities all over the world that are looking to establish their own ethical legitimacy in terms of the pedagogy of the content which is delivered to students, but also to establish their relevance in solving some of the major problems facing humanity at this moment in history. So what we see, therefore, is a coming together of conversations around reparatory justice, and that is the historic role of universities in establishing the crimes against humanity in the context of Western modernity. And we know, of course, that most of the universities of prominence and historical depth, the ancient universities, were all embedded in one way or another in establishing and prolonging, sustaining the slavery system. So that is a subject for them to examine. And at the same time, we are all, as universities, called upon to participate in delivering on the sustainable development goals that the world societies have come together to project and to achieve as part of the rescue, and not only of the planet itself, but also, of course, of the human species. So we're all, therefore, engaged in this dialogue between how universities ought to position themselves to deal with the SDGs, and at the same time, how universities in the global north especially are trying to understand how it is that there were critical stakeholders and share owners in the slavery system. These conversations have come together, which will suggest, therefore, that what is being proposed here this morning is, in fact, very contemporary, very germane to the project of higher education globally. And this is why the University of the West Indies is one of dozens of universities that are all engaged in the same conversation. Well, beginning with the project? Well, we all know what has happened. The colonial regime and the slavery system, it bred the genocide against indigenous people, which was among the first victims of this modernity project. The universities themselves were deeply involved in this. They provided a rationale for colonization. The economics and the financing of this system came out of the scholarship of universities. The legal infrastructure that sought to provide legal justification for these actions came out of law faculties and law schools. The theology around race and culture and civilization came out of the theology schools, in which the human species was defined and categorized into sections on a hierarchical scale. All of that thinking came out of universities, the theology schools, and therefore played a critical role. So from economics, theology, political science, constitutional governance, biology, all of that work that enabled the slavery system persist came out of the intellectual framework, and therefore academics institutions were very, very much at the center of the development and sustaining of these crimes. And now, of course, we're all seeking to clean up the legacies, the horrendous human mess, the carnage has been created, the toxicity of racism and its consequences. All of these things are now being addressed by universities around the SDGs. Whether we look at climate change, whether it's food security, the gender inequality, questions around public health and human survival, all of these matters are in fact linked to the historical period in which fundamental inequality was a critical part of the extraction of wealth from the developing countries, from those countries that had been colonized, in fact. So the connections between all of these things are very important. Hence, they cannot be researched and discussed in isolation. It has to be an interdisciplinary approach. It has to be a trans-faculty approach. Specialized universities and schools have to come on board based upon their own skill sets and their own strategic plan. But in effect, therefore, these two conversations of sustainability and the conversation around reparatory justice are interlocked and interlinked. Hence, we now are talking about issues of climate change and climate justice, economic inequality, the North-South divide, and social justice for all. All of these conversations are now brought together within these clusters. Hence, what you are suggesting here, Madam Chair, is precisely on the cutting edge of global higher education at this time. And wherever we turn, we are faced with the same conversation. But there continues to be resistance. There continue to be tremendous hostility. Just this morning, I was informed that Harvard University has, in fact, shut down its repair project, in which it had committed to identifying the descendants of those slave plantations that gave rise to Harvard University, financed out of the slavery plantations of Antigua. But just a week ago, I was speaking to the Harvard University scholars who were in Antigua and who had identified over 150 descendants of those enslaved people who were part of that transaction, the sale of human beings to establish Harvard University. And out of the blue, we're now told that that project has been terminated, having reached this level of sophistication, because we now know one thing. So far, the majority of universities that have established their origins in slavery, in the funding from the slavery system, all of them, having done the research and identified their roots, are now running away. Hence, I have framed the concept of research and run. Rather than research and repair, research and run has now become the common political response of universities in the global north. And this is a terrible circumstance. But this is part of the dialectics of these circumstances. So, Madam Chair, tremendous honor to be a part of this conversation this morning. It is, as I have said, on the cutting edge of higher education everywhere. These interconnections, the search for linkages between reparatory justice, the sustainable development goals, how are we going to stabilize the economies of the world? How are we going to remove the hostility around race and culture that has created tensions in human relations? How do we create a better world by interacting the concept of reparatory justice with those of sustainability of the human condition? So thank you, and I hope that all colleagues who are involved in this, not only at the University of the West Indies, but all participants everywhere, that we're all in this together. And we are, in fact, a band of academic soldiers in search of justice and equality for everyone. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Vice Chancellor. You have positioned this deep, complex, necessary work for us, and positioning the fact that this is an interdisciplinary project, this nature of reparatory justice, the ethical role of universities such as UWI, even as the links to the extraction of wealth from chattel slavery, it still detains us. So I want to really thank you for these remarks, for the recognition that this cluster is at the cutting edge of global higher educational development in the world, and that we must indeed resist, even as there is the research and run phenomenon. We must resist becoming tired, becoming weary of this fantastic work that we have in front of us. So thank you so much, Vice Chancellor. I do know that you won't be able to be with us for too long. So please, we are really very thankful that you were able to make the time.
Thank you.
That, let me invite Professor Aldry Henry Lee, PVC, for Graduate Studies and Research at the University of the West Indies, to give us her opening remarks.
Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor, Ms. Sandria Maynard, Pro Vice Chancellor, Global Affairs, Dr. Sonia Stanley Nair, Director, Center, Reparation Research, other distinguished speakers, esteemed UWI students and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good day, good afternoon, good morning. It is an honor to bring greetings at the launch of the One UWI Research Cluster on Reparatory Justice. Congratulations to Dr. Sonia Nair and her team. The establishment of this research cluster is not just an academic exercise, but also the UWI's manifested profound commitment to addressing the historical injustices that have shaped the socioeconomic landscape of the Caribbean. We cannot speak about reparations without quoting our VC, and it's a little intimidating to come right after him, but I want us to think of his words as he said those words on April 3rd, 2024, and I quote, "There is no institution in modernity that has challenged the world so profoundly as the transatlantic slave trade and slavery in general, and we see the evidence of these legacies everywhere. In most societies where it is touched, those are now structured in such a way that the people of African descent are the most marginalized," end of quote. So Beckles continues to argue that this accumulated wealth was extracted through forced labor and human suffering, constituting a debt that remains unpaid. Our VC asserts that the legacies of slavery and colonialism are not historical artifacts, but living realities. There are, ladies and gentlemen, urgent moral, legal, and economic imperatives for reparatory justice if we are to attain sustainable development in the global South. There is an urgent need for reparation as a development strategy aimed at rectifying systemic inequities and fostering resilience in the Caribbean societies. So we at the UWI do not embark on this journey alone. This cluster builds on the extensive work of regional and international organizations, including the CARICOM reparations commissions and the various reparations commissions in the islands. The CARICOM Reparations Commission has provided a comprehensive 10-point action plan for reparatory justice. The proposed strategies include full apologies, addressing the inequities in health and education, debt cancellation, psychological rehabilitation, technology transfer, and repatriation. Research, ladies and gentlemen, is a critical catalyst to increase robust academic inquiry and evidence-based advocacy that are indispensable in shaping policies and strategies that advance the cause of justice. I look forward to the activities of this reparation research cluster, which should include the monitoring of the implementation of the CARICOM 10-point plan. I am sure that we'll witness from this research cluster interdisciplinary research, publications, conferences, seminars, training and skills development, public education, policy advocacy, and community engagement. We at the School for Graduate Studies and Research are committed to supporting all research clusters and research activities. We continue to facilitate and host capacity building opportunities for our students and staff researchers. Research for research grants and scholarship assists with the writing of grant proposal and grant implementation. Through our One UE research clusters, we encourage interdisciplinary collaborations with key internal and external stakeholders and provide opportunities for both emerging scholars and seasoned academics to engage in transformative work. As we launch this cluster, we are reminded of the words of Frantz Fanon, who declared in The Wretched of the Earth, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. Our UWI mission is clear: to contribute to the transformation of the Caribbean into a region where justice, equity, and sustainable development are not aspirational, but lived realities. In closing, we are reminded that the pursuit of reparation and development is not just an academic exercise, but a moral imperative. It is a call to action for each and every one of us. Thank you for being here online today, and thank you for your dedication to this vital endeavor. Together, we honor the memory of our ancestors through active, continued support for this important research reparation cluster. Congratulations to Dr. Stanley Nayo and her team for the establishment of this critical research cluster. Together, we'll ensure that the Caribbean's path to sustainable development is one of dignity, equity, justice, and excellence. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, PVC Aldra Henry Lee. We are indeed on the mission. And thanks for these remarks and for the reminder that this is not just an academic exercise. It's a moral imperative, and it is the right time. We are on the right side of history. Thank you so much. I want to now ask Ms. Sandria Maynard, PVC Global Affairs, to give us her remarks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stanley Nair. May I, of course, acknowledge our Vice Chancellor, our PVC of Global Affairs, and of course you, Madam Chair, in addition to all of those who are joining us across the world. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I think that totals what welcome I would like to certainly bring, but it's a real pleasure to be here at this launch for the Center for the Center for Reparations and Research, their virtual launch. And this cluster on reparatory justice just cements the work that has been carried out by this center and also by the University of the West Indies. Now, since I've been here at the UE, I've had the absolute pleasure of working with many distinguished colleagues at this institution and our partner institutions in relation to this essential global issue, many of whom are in attendance today. Now, I don't want to reiterate what has been excellently spoken about earlier, but we know that reparatory justice is a global issue. We also know that that issue carries the legacies of colonialism, slavery, and other historical injustices that necessitate reparations across the world. For those impacted nations and populations globally, there must be continued awareness and actions designed to highlight the interconnected issues of inequality and economic disparities. There is no doubt as to why reparatory justice, again, is a global issue. And I just want to sort of summarize the fact that we have the historical reach of colonialism. And as Sir Hilary Beckles, our Vice Chancellor, quoted, and sums it up very, very neatly in his article to the UN in March of last year. And that was discussing local moments to global movements, reparation mechanisms, and a development framework. And he sums up that Europeans had built colonial empires across 80% of planet Earth. They plundered, appropriated, and domesticated the extracted wealth, including the labor of enslaved men and women, for national, economic, and social transformation. And because of this, this makes this issue of reparations relevant to many countries worldwide. Again, we also have to consider the interconnectedness of the issues. The effect of colonialism can be linked to many contemporary issues, such as climate change, economic disparities, racial injustice, and it just creates this complex web of problems that certainly does necessitate global solutions. And developed countries should, in fact, compensate developing nations who have been disproportionately impacted by climate change, considering their historical role in greenhouse gas emissions. The other area that is of significant importance, and probably something close to my heart also, being in the law, is looking at the international legal framework and looking at how these concepts of crimes against humanity really forms this basis of discussing reparations at an international level. And Cam Howard, who wrote a paper for the UN, sums it quite nicely that our legal basis for reparations is that the chattelization wars, enslavement, colonizations, and apartheid were indeed crimes against humanity that mandates redress. So we must, colleagues, continue our global activism and solidarity and advocating for reparatory justice in a global setting. And we do need all of you. We really need everyone to collaborate, continue to raise awareness, and demand accountability. So what I will say, Dr. Stanley Nair, is wishing you and colleagues every success. And I'm looking forward to continuing my engagement with the Centre for Reparations and Research. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, PVC Sandria Maynard. Those remarks help us to certainly understand that cementing the work of the Centre and the UWI more broadly as global work is important, and that there is interconnection, if anybody was unaware, with the issues such as climate change. And we are concerned clearly about economic disparities, racial injustice. And of course, we're talking about crimes against humanity. And the research cluster that we're launching this morning will absolutely include exploration of the legal angles in relation to this matter. So thank you so much. Colleagues, it is now time for me to share with you a presentation on this research cluster. What does it involve? What are some of the ways in which we are going to be working? And just as the images are coming up on your screen, I will speak to some of the ways in which this research cluster is in fact going to be cutting edge. When I came into the role as director of the Center for Reparation Research, I said to myself, in this time, in this period of time, the business of reparatory justice must not be perceived as the work of one or two or three or four individuals. And I said, within the large University of the West Indies spread across the Caribbean, spread across the CARICOM region, it must be that we consolidate, we seek to consolidate the work being conducted by colleagues, by researchers, by even students at the graduate level in relation to reparatory justice, this business of repair. So reparation research in the Caribbean is critical for addressing the legacies of racism, slavery, colonialism, and their socioeconomic impact of the region. But of course, we are also, in the context of this research cluster, essential to systematically build capacity, generate revenue, and foster collaboration with key partners. And we're going to hear from some of these partners today. The Center for Reparation Research's strategic plan, aligned with the UWI's strategic plan, that RRR strategy, focuses on creating this research cluster on reparation within the UWI while positioning national reparation committees at the center of advocacy, education, and collaborative action. And I know most of you would be aware that the ecosystem for reparation in the region includes the National Reparation Committees, which are within the CARICOM Reparation Commission. And of course, there's a Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on reparation as well. The strategic plan outlines the core goals, the strategic actions, and key outcomes needed to advance reparation research. So we are about reparation research, we are about advocacy, and we are about education. I also want to just, for your own benefit, share with you that the vision of the center is to become the leading center for reparation research, advocacy, and education in the Caribbean, fostering collaborative efforts and addressing the historical injustices of slavery and colonialism while advancing the region's socioeconomic development. Because what else would we be here doing if not advancing the region's socioeconomic development, and by extension, or certainly within that context, responding to national development goals. And of course, you can see there on the screen our mission, but let me also introduce you to some of the recent works published by the Center for Reparation Research. We have texts, An Introduction to Reparations for Secondary Schools by Shepard and Hemmings, Ahmed Reed and Shepard, also Hemmings and Shorter, Producing the Appleton Estate, From the Dickinson Family to the Campari Group, A Short History. So from time to time, we are also producing works commissioned of the center in order to provide research on a variety of matters. The special issue of Social and Economic Studies focused on reparation, also edited by Shepard and Reed. We're also in recent times, just recently off the press, 20 questions and answers on reparation, published by the Center for Reparation Research out of Ian Randall Publishers. And there are more publications to come. An edited collection, for example, featuring works out of our webinar series, which has been focused on the CARICOM's 10-point plan. Now, positioning the center, I'm not going to go through much into this timeline, but just so you have a sense of the kind of positioning of the center, that we understand through this timeline the kind of historical trajectory that we're dealing with, that the reparation movement is taking time. Many persons are not aware of some of the wins, and we're going to share some of the ways in which, based on the work of the university and the CARICOM Reparation Commission, there are some important notations on the timeline that we want to underscore. We are producing literature. There's also in 2016, the Center for Reparation Research initiated dialogue with 6 former colonizing nations, laying the groundwork for reparatory justice for the region. In 2018, of course, the University of Glasgow committed to assist the UWI in fundraising for reparatory justice, and that was a commitment of £20 million over 20 years. In 2023, Caribbean reparatory justice advocates met African royals, bridging regional gaps and dispelling myths through knowledge sharing sessions. And of course, we want to acknowledge at this time the PJ Patterson Center, which is Institute rather, which of course is a partner in the project as we move as one university in the task of engaging with our African colleagues, certainly on the continent and in the diaspora in relation to reparatory justice. So there is a timeline. The one important thing I also want to acknowledge beyond the apologies that have come from various entities, institutions, families, and governments, that we do have also in 2023, the Brattle Report, which is a quantification of reparations for transatlantic chattel slavery in the Americas, which becomes a very key document in understanding what kind of damage we're talking about in terms of reparation. Now, we talk about some of the wins. Here we have 6 in 10 in UK polls say descendants of enslaved people owed a formal apology. Many of these governments are not looking to apologize because, of course, an apology comes with a responsibility to enact repair. The Church of England issues slavery apology. We have quite a number of these bits of news for you to take account of. But where are we going in terms of repairing narratives? The reparation research intends to unite disciplines. We have heard the word interdisciplinary being used so far in this launch. Through consultations with colleagues on the UWI campus, one of the very first things I did as I came in as director, the Center for Reparation Research is proposing the establishment of, or proposed the establishment of a reparation research cluster, because there were so many colleagues who responded to the call with their own works aligned to the reparatory justice agenda. And you can see on the right side of the screen, indicative research output. We have already been receiving details of publications. You can see there at the bottom, Patricia Green, 2024, Decolonization of Historic Caribbean Urbanism, Revisiting Architecture and Cultural Landscape, Sustainable Dilemma. And let's be clear that the process of decolonization is also, as we said, in an interdisciplinary context, must include symbolic decolonization, must include structural questions around architecture and so on, urbanization. And we want to highlight Brian Whiting, Reconsidering Rabland, a geographical survey of Newton enslaved burial ground in Barbados, brought to my attention by Dr. Tara Innis out of the Cable campus. There are so many exciting ways in which scholars on the UWI campuses have been engaged in reparatory justice work. And it was just a matter of time before we were able to consolidate this kind of work. Now, what are these results? The themes emerging from the research survey: public health and epidemiology, climate change and agriculture, ethnogenetics, psychohistoriography, gender-based violence, indigenous studies, language and linguistics, a number of them there. Of course, cultural identity and sociology, the prison industrial complex, theology, ethics and quality archives. Now, the criminal justice system, a wide array of themes emerging, and you can see there the kinds of percentages that we saw, the following themes in terms of the questions asked being explored in the work of scholars. The reparation research cluster sub-themes, you can see there some of the names of our colleagues within the UWI, and thematically, environmental and climate justice, rehabilitation, wellness and health, education and gender, cultural and heritage retention. And these are our colleagues responding to the call in relation to the work. I'm not going to go too much into the CRR's work plan. Those who would want to speak to us at a bilateral or multilateral level, certainly we can share these documents with you. But in order for you to understand the UWI's AAA strategy, there are some codes there in terms of alignment, agility, and access. And of course, the Center for Reparation Research's work plan is very much documenting the ways in which we are already aligned with the university's AAA strategy. Of course, the launch of a research cluster on reparatory justice is one of the key items in this work plan. So let me just give you a brief synopsis of the core objectives over the next 5 years. We want to establish this research cluster on reparations at the UWI. We want to collaborate with national reparation commissions and strategic partners, develop educational and advocacy programs, creating revenue-generating research initiatives. And of course, one of our major objectives is to attract grant funding, research funding, and expand our partnerships and, in fact, our consultancy services as well. We want to also continue to engage in international advocacy, but now we have more voices in the UWI in the context of this work. So I won't go too much further. This is just an elaboration, more points in the context of this research cluster that we have elaborated in the context of years, year 1, year 2, and year 3, some of the ways in which we're going to be building on this work and the cluster in particular. This CRR has an advisory board. I want to share those names with you, as well as a network of scholars. And we are very proud and pleased to have this wide array of not just disciplines, distinguished colleagues, international reach in relation to our advisory board and the network of scholars. And with that, colleagues, I just want to thank you all for being here with us on this, I would say, auspicious occasion. It's one of our let me say, pride projects, that to launch a research cluster on reparation in the university is one of my dreams, one of my personal dreams. And I know that it will be fulfilling, that it will be fruitful, and that we are on the right side of history. Thank you. If there are any questions, please do put them in the Q&A function. We will try to respond to them as we move through this morning's proceedings. Now, I said we were going to hear from representatives of the cluster, some of our collaborators, and it is my pleasure now to introduce Professor Sylvia Cohenberg, Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, who was our very first respondent in the survey. I had to ask her to say a few words this morning. Sylvia?
Thank you so much, Sonja. I want to elaborate a little on some of the things I put in my recent Gleaner articles, which were published under the auspices of the Center for Reparation Research. The call for reparations for the historical injustices perpetrated upon millions of Africans who were rendered into the transatlantic slave trade has rightfully focused on the crimes committed against the body, the crimes of enslavement. As member of the reparations cluster, I want to argue that we need to pay equal attention to the cultural erasure that accompanied enslavement and to the crimes committed against the mind. Reparatory justice must then, I will argue, include national and Caribbean-wide campaigns to create awareness of those crimes against the mind and undo the damage they inflicted. Some of that work has begun, for instance, through that publication series, but that awareness-creating educational work needs to be scaled up significantly, both in its local reach to all in the population, not just the highly literate, and to the regional level to reach people across the region. Rupert Lewis, in his 2018 biography of Marcus Garvey, points out that the power of creating subject identities was the remit of the colonizers, and the acceptance of these identities by the colonized represented an important conquest, the conquest of the mind, end quote. In this conquest of the mind, the belief has been internalized that white European culture is superior, Black African culture inferior. Despite this, it is easily observable that the cultural practices of Afro-descended Caribbean populations are not those of white Europeans. Caribbean peoples today do not speak, eat, move, believe, inhabit their spaces, philosophize, dress, create music, in short, live in the same ways as white Europeans. These Caribbean cultural practices have been referred to variously as hybrid and as Creole. I'm going to use the term Creole. And many scholars, of course, have argued that the so-called Creole cultures of the Caribbean represent an intangible diasporic African heritage. Taking the examples of language with which I am most familiar, the child who is berated in the classroom for saying "Miss, me can go bathroom," appears on the surface to be using English words. But below the surface, the child is using a pronoun system, a tense system, a question system, and verb subcategorization system that belong to Jamaican Creole or Patois. In other words, the child speaks a language with a grammar unlike that of English, hidden below the surface of English-sounding words. The identity imposed by the colonizer that Lewis spoke of, internalized by speakers of Patois over more than 350 years, has it that this language is inferior and that the speaker of this language, by implication, is inferior. The late Mervyn Alleyne, our foremost Caribbean linguist, argued that what exists below the surface is a grammar built by enslaved Africans who use their native language knowledge to construct new linguistic practices. In Mervyn Alleyne's words, many aspects of Creole grammars constitute African continuities, hence diasporic African heritage, and he extended that argument to many other aspects of Caribbean culture. The almost superhuman creative efforts which yielded the Creole cultures of the modern Caribbean largely continue to go unappreciated, unrecognized, at best co-opted, to be turned into quaint folklore. I actually think of Junkanoo as a prime example. To me, it is debatable whether JCDC saved Junkanoo or turned it into a folkloric relic. Many in Jamaica and across the Caribbean would love to see languages such as Patois similarly relegated to the status of folkloric relic. Fortunately, that is unlikely to happen. I argued recently that Creole languages such as Patois constitute cultural capital. Today, this cultural capital is actually transnational, not only because it has been taken abroad by the Caribbean diaspora, but because it has gained recognition with global audience who are themselves not of Caribbean origin. Nevertheless, it is degraded by those at home who would rather identify with a presumed superior culture. The rationalization of that attitude is that Patois is not the language of international trade and is a hindrance to the pursuit of education and economic advancement. To this I say that it is the lack of recognition of Patois that causes speakers of the language to be excluded from education and socioeconomic advancement. Those who do not speak English pay a devastating cost for Jamaica's status as an English-speaking country. A cost in the form of exclusion from quality education and socioeconomic opportunities, but also in the form of mental harm and the trauma that results from growing up with an understanding that your language and culture brand you as inferior. Any gains made in learning English by children for whom the odds are stacked against learning it are not even rewarded because emphasis is placed on what children fail to learn of this language. That injustice is not repaired by throwing money at education. We can equip our schools better, we can train our teachers better, but we cannot remove beliefs about language from the reality of the classroom. Beliefs that have it that speakers of Patois are intellectually inferior. The Jamaican word is dunce, and that English is beyond the capacity of Patois speakers, of most Patois speakers, to learn. This is why reparatory justice not only requires the formal recognition of Creole languages and cultures, but also public education campaigns aimed at undoing the aforementioned crimes against the mind and repairing the trauma that has come from this branding of inferiority. Such campaigns are to create awareness of the value of the cultural capital embodied in Creole language and culture. Such campaigns are necessary to undo the mental harm of attitudes which have their historical origins in the colonial imposition of beliefs, and to combat beliefs about inferiority. What is our task in this? Allow me to quote from Mervyn Allain's Roots of Jamaican Culture, where he says, "Without intellectual articulation, the culture of a people is often nothing more than a random mass of knowledge, beliefs, habits, products, and systems of production." And he saw it as the task of intellectuals such as himself to systematize this mass and give it structured coherence. In this vein, and with this research cluster, which includes members from areas including such as history and archaeology, linguistics, Rastafari studies, cultural studies, archival studies, and I'm sure more will be added, our agenda must be one of commitment to systematizing knowledge of Creole cultures, commitment to exposing the cultural erasure of the African continuities in these cultures, commitment to exposing the mental harm and trauma caused by branding of these cultures as inferior, of exposing the crimes against the mind that have led to a lack of recognition of the cultural capital that Creole cultures represent, and thus laying the foundation for the re-education that has to follow. Thank you for allowing me the space to articulate these thoughts.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. And I know that anyone online, if there was any lack of clarity about the kind of work that we must do and the far-reaching impact of reparatory justice as an agenda, I know that now they are certainly clear. At least I hope so. You have shared with us insights from your own research, Sylvia, and in fact, advocacy. The decolonization project is a far-reaching one, and the work of removing perceptions around things like language, Creole languages, the patois. You've used Jamaican in the example, as an example this morning for us to grapple with the kind of mental sort of terror that has been inflicted on peoples of African descent in this part of the world from plantation times to now. It still continues. This is 2025, and we are still engaged in conversations around this kind of mental terror inflicted on our children in particular, who grow up to be adults, feeling as though the languages that they're using, or Creole languages or mother tongues, are inferior. And I want to just say to you that we will take on the task of collaborating with the entities such as the Jamaican Language Unit and others for projects such as putting language and identity as one of the key projects in the cluster. I am certainly committed to this, and we must, through this kind of endeavor, relegate folkloric relic making to a thing of the past. It's one of the products, I would say, of a certain kind of mental slavery that we must discontinue. Thank you so much, Sylvia. I want to now call on Miss Lucy Gaffney, who is a company director of the Repair Campaign, to give us her remarks as a collaborator in the business of reparatory justice.
I just wanted to thank you very much, Madam Chair, Dr. Sonia, for inviting me on behalf of the Repair Campaign here today. There's a number of people that I've seen that we've worked with. I can see Halima's here, Arlie Gill is online, Pat Northover that we did a huge amount of work in Jamaica is on here, Mia. There's so many I would like to call friends and colleagues now in this space. I think that while it's been very intimidating, following on from, not only Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, but everybody else around this table here today, I think that the themes that have come out have been hugely encouraging for us, because we, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles and everybody else have talked about how everything is interlocked, how everything is interlinked, and how this is an interdisciplinary Center for Reparation Research and this cluster. And I think that is at the very core of our relationship, the Repair Campaign's relationship with the reparatory justice movement in the Caribbean, but it's also at the core of our relationship with the University of West Indies and specifically the CRR and CARICOM, which I'll just talk to about. For those of you that don't know who we are, I'm joined on this webinar with fellow director Sinead Walsh, I'm joined with the program director, Frank O'Carroll, Brian Royce from Jamaica, Sharon Roper for Jamaica. So the entire repair campaign is here today because it's terribly important for us. We were formed in 2022 by Dennis O'Brien, who was the founder of Digicel, and I was a founding director as well. So he's worked for 25 to 30 years in the Caribbean, as I have, as Sinead has, as everybody has that's on the team. But while he founded the Digicel and he founded some foundations, he also was very, very aware in terms of the conversations that he was having and the friends and the colleagues about the history of slavery and colonization. And so in 2022, he founded the Repair Campaign to see what he could do with his team to amplify all the work that was being done by CARICOM, all the leaders of each of the 15 member states of CARICOM under the secretariat led by Hilary Brown. What we did was we decided we would get two groups of rapporteurs. I led one, Sinead led the other. We visited all 15 countries. We met with over 400 different groups of people, individuals, Rastafari, different religious groups, indigenous groups, the Queen of the Garifuna in Belize, everything. We met and we talked and we listened to them. Most importantly, we absolutely listened. And we heard what they had to say about their past and what we could do. So what we did was we went and we looked at the 10-point plan, the 2014 10-point plan. And we met with Professor Sir Hilary Beckles. And we said, we want to do something. Professor, please tell us what we can do. And he very correctly and immediately directed us to Professor Don Marshall in Salises, who is the head of Salises, through UWI. And what we did with them was we tasked his team to actually researching the 15 member states. And, some were more difficult than others. Certainly Haiti has been a bit of a challenge and we're nearly completion there. And because of all of the work that Professor Marshall and his team did and the work that we had done as rapporteurs, what we're working on now is working on 15 country-specific socio-economic reparatory justice plans, which are highlighting community-driven and very country-specific, just to say again, projects that are focusing on primarily transforming education, which today has been all about, healthcare, technological developments, among other things such as climate change, vulnerability. These plans have the support of Professor Sir Hilary Beckles and of CARICOM. And when approved, and we've been in constant dialogue with the 15 member states and the reparations commissions in each of them, when approved by each of them and their heads of government, will be used as further evidence of the region's need and readiness and right to reparations. And it was really fantastic on one level to hear the talk and the focus that Sir Beckles had in terms of the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, because there is no doubt that Sustainable Development Goals for each of the 15 countries just will not be able to be met because of the way that the ex-colonial powers left these particular countries. That's one way of work that we're trying to involve ourselves in the reparatory justice movement. And the second one is through our digital channels and social media, led by Brian Royce, who's on this call. And through them, we're amplifying the calls for reparatory justice throughout the region. And we're trying to get connected with and get interlinked with, to use Beckles' language, with young people via storytelling, via music, via all of the different cultural aspects of the Caribbean. We've had influential discussions with people and podcasts with people such as Dr. Vereen Shepherd. We've partnered with you now, Dr. Sonia as well, and we will with you, please God, help your latest initiative, which is the CRR reparations debate with schools across the region, because we're very focused on kids, on children, I should say. My kids say, I shouldn't say kids. We have found that the Centre for Reparation Research and CLESES have been critical and centre and core. And last week we met with all the High Commissioners in London of all of the 15 CARICOM countries, and we put front and centre is the relationship that we have with the CRR and with UE, and the absolute need for embedded research so that ex-colonial powers cannot say this is in the past and it has no link, and it has no link to the future. The link between the past, the present, and the ability to actually meet those sustainable development goals is absolutely critical. We can't shy away from the violent extraction of wealth over 300 years, but which left, as Dennis O'Brien says, the 15 countries at independence with bare cupboards. Those legacies are still really evident in today, with the high levels of crime, the brain drain once people do leave school, if they do get to school, the fact that so few young girls in Haiti get to even go to secondary school. And we feel that the UK and the EU is not generally, the public and indeed the legislators are not aware of this, to this wealth extraction and the link to today. And that's why it's devastating to hear that the work that was being done by Vincent Brown in Harvard, I only heard today from Beckles, and I heard that is actually coming to an end, because that was being really critical. Colonial, and I'm going to finish now, colonial exploitation, obviously, and the enslavement of kidnapped Africans created a framework of oppression, which fellow panelists have said much more articulately than me, which is still experienced in today's daily lives. The intergenerational trauma, health issues, hypertension, heart disease, underfunded health systems. And unearthing those facts and other historical facts, the way that the violence against women from the past has found its way into violence against women today, all of those things is actually, that link is critical. And that's where your research and this research cluster is absolutely centre to everything in terms of the reparations movement as the repair campaign see it. I commend you for coming up with this initiative. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I know this is a very academic group, but I would even say to all of the 70 or so people who are on this call that engage with everybody's network, your friends, your families, to talk about the history. You reference books that have been written, the questions and answers, Professor Shepherd's book, all of that. The education is important. The governments of the former colonizers' reluctance to acknowledge this history, or even to discuss a meaningful apology, does reflect the widespread lack of education and misinformation in this space. But I am confident that this new cluster is going to begin the process of rectifying this. I think that I can't say it better. Most of us can't say anything better than Professor Beckles, but he did say recently at an event in New York, the reparations movement will be the greatest political movement of the 21st century. And for the repair campaign, who is humbled and privileged to walk alongside that movement, we see that the work that you are doing is critical to any success that we all may have in the future. And as everybody else has said here today, it's time for us to be on the right side of history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. I think that your comments certainly have positioned the ways in which the link between the past and the present is clear. And this is something that has been outlined in the CARICOM 10-point plan, and it is certainly a guiding focus of our work at the Center for Reparation Research. Colleagues, friends of the center, members of the network of scholars, distinguished UWI colleagues, all participants on this call today, consider the UWI, the one UWI research cluster on reparatory justice launched. We will proceed to enact what I now refer to as mainstreaming reparation from street to stage. We will have our meetings, we will engage with our collaborators and partners, and there is much work to be done. My personal thanks to all of you who have shared with us this morning, each speaker, each attendee, but the thanks is not for me only to do this morning. I want to call on our Junior Research Fellow, Ms. Mia McMorris, to do the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, colleagues. On behalf of the Center for Reparation Research, I would like to thank you so much for giving us some of your valuable time as we enter what is hopefully a new era of reparation research. I am thrilled to see all of you here today. It's definitely exciting to know about your interest. And I want to take some time to really consider what all of our panelists have said today. We are really facing global issues as activists and academics, and the center is just really thrilled to be able to create a space that can move beyond university protocols, create opportunities to move past research into action, and really achieve the sustainable development goals of the University of the West Indies. I want to take another moment to thank our panelists for their interventions, the team from the Vice Chancellor's Office, UETV, Office of Graduate Studies and Global Affairs, and of course, the team at the Center for making this launch possible. I hope to hear more from you, and please remember to check out our YouTube channel where this and all of our webinars are accessible. Our Instagram at the Center for CRR_UE for any information about our upcoming events, and check in with us. Send us an email at reparation.research@umona.edu.jm. Thank you again.